Hi, I'm Bobby, and in today's video I'm going to talk about some series that I want to start reading. So I've got 9 books today. They're all the first book in the series, and almost all of them are fantasy books. So some of these books I have tried reading, but I didn't get very far through them, and then I put them down for a while, and I want to have another try at reading through them and trying to complete the entire series. So let's get into the books. The first book I want to talk about is one that has become quite popular recently, and that is The Assassins Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is one of the books that I have started already. As you can see, I've only got about 20 pages into it so far, and I tried reading it a couple of months ago, so I don't even remember what happened at the beginning. This is a book about a boy called Fitz, who is the bastard son of a prince. And at the beginning of this first book, he is taken back to the castle and given back to the prince by his maternal grandfather. And from what I know about it, his dad refuses to take him in, and he's basically made into the stable boy, where he finds that he has some special affinity with animals. I don't know a lot about this series, but I believe throughout the trilogy we follow Fitz as he grows up. So in the first book he is a young boy growing into a young adult, and then I think in the second book he's a young adult, and the third book he is a bit older. So this series is kind of an account of his entire life. So yeah, I have had this book for quite a few years now. I bought it ages ago when I wanted to try and get into adult fantasy a bit more, but I never picked it up. It looked just too intimidating. But because it's been around BookTube quite a lot recently, it's sort of been on my mind and I kind of want to have another go. I've heard that the first book isn't the best in the series and it's quite slow to begin with, but I do think I want to read this before I read the next trilogy, which sounds a lot more interesting to me. So the next series I want to talk about is an oldie but a goodie, and that is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So back at the end of 2012, just before the Hobbit movies came out, I started reading The Hobbit and I really enjoyed that book, but then I found that the Lord of the Rings series just seemed too intimidating to me. Like, it's a really long book. Well, it's about 530 pages, which isn't as long as what I'm used to. It was much longer than what I was used to back then, and I just found it too intimidating. But now that I'm more used to reading longer fantasy books, I think I'd be much more comfortable reading the story. I'll be honest, I don't really know a lot about this series. Like, I read The Hobbit, and I feel like that's a separate story. And in this book we follow Frodo as he goes on a journey to recover the ring, but I don't really know any more details about that. Like, I've never seen the films, I've never really discussed this, so I just want to have another go at reading this book. It's one of those books that I have tried reading before, and I don't remember how far I got, but I didn't get very far. I've also tried listening to the audiobook, but that didn't really get me much further either. I think I still have the audiobook on my phone, so I might try listening to this soon, or I'll just pick this book up and have a go at reading it. The next series is the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. The first book in the series is The Lies of Locke Lamora. I bought this book back in 2014 maybe, so I've had it a long time, and it's another book that's just intimidated me because it was quite a long book and it's fantasy, which especially back then was quite intimidating for me. I did talk about this book recently in my September TBR video. I am quite keen to read this book soon. Hopefully I will get to it this month. I don't really know a lot about this series. I believe it is a heist story about a man called Locke Lamora, who is the ringleader of their gang, and I don't really know much more. But I have recently heard Reagan from Peruse Project talk about this series, so that sort of inspired me to have another go at reading it. I did read maybe a few pages of this book a few years ago, but I don't remember it. I don't remember when I tried reading it. I don't remember anything about it. I just don't remember it. So hopefully I'll get to this book soon and I'll get a lot further this time. The fourth series I want to talk about is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a book I purchased fairly recently, and it is also quite popular at the moment. This book is a dystopian story set in a world where they regularly have seasons of severe weather which can potentially end the world. And when this book starts, it is the beginning of one of those seasons. A woman has just found her son dead and her daughter missing, supposedly by her husband, I believe. I tried reading the first chapter just to see if I was ready to read it. And I found that it is written in second person, which is like really different to what you normally get in books these days. I'm quite eager to read this book before all the hype dies out, so hopefully I'll get to it quite soon. I might put it on a TBR for next month, maybe, but I should really get to this one soon because it sounds so good. So series 5 on my list is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is a sci-fi series set in a school for space pilot, and to me a school setting just sounds really cool. I don't know a lot about this book, but I've read the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, so I know that I like his writing style and I loved his characters in that series. So I think I could really enjoy this series. So I really want to read this series because I want to get into the sci-fi genre, and I think that reading an author that I already know and feel comfortable with will really help me to ease into this genre. The next series on my list is one that starts with a book that is on my current TBR, and that is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. So this is on my TBR for September, and I mentioned it in my previous video. This is a detective series set in the Victorian era, and it is about a woman who investigates obscure mysteries. So in the first book she's looking into Jack the Ripper. For those of you who don't know about Jack the Ripper, basically he was an infamous serial killer who murdered prostitutes and cut off bits of their body and did really, really horrible things to them. Aside from murdering them, obviously. In real life, Jack the Ripper was never caught. So in this book, the character is following the mystery of Jack the Ripper, and I'm pretty sure that she's doing it in secret because the sort of detective thing was like deemed unsuitable for women in those days. So she's sort of hiding this part of her identity of being a detective, and I think that's quite a fun way of doing this story. I also think it'll be really interesting to see how they sort of end up discovering Jack the Ripper. Like if they do, or how they explain it at the end, because like I said, Jack the Ripper was never caught, so there's no real conclusion to that story in history. The sequels to this series are about Dracula, Houdini and the Devil, which I think are all quite interesting, and I'd be really intrigued to read them if I enjoy reading this story first. And then we have The Children of Blood and Bone by Tony Adeyemi. This book was really popular a few years ago, and I think there's still quite a lot of hype about it, but it's sort of like mellowed a little bit. This is a fantasy series about, I believe, a race of people who had their magic stolen from them, and one girl who is a descendant from this race and decides to go and retrieve the power. So as a lot of people know, this is a book about a black character written by a black author, and I think that is going to be quite an important thing to read because a lot of people don't focus on that, and I know that I certainly don't have a ton of experience of that representation, so I think that'll be quite educational for me. I believe this is a dual perspective narrative about two characters who join up to try and retrieve this magic power. I'm really interested to read this book because it was so hyped for so long, and I think it could be a really good book. Book 8 on my list is another one that I feel that I only bought because of Reagan from Peruse Project, and that is Black Prism by Brent Week. This is the Lightbringer series, and I believe there are about 5 or 6 books in this series, so it is quite a long one, and all the books look quite hefty, so that is quite intimidating. I have tried reading this book before. I got up to about page... well, that's where that bookmark went. I got to page 100, which is the beginning of chapter 16, but for some reason I put it down, and I don't know why. This is a fantasy series with a magic system based on the colours of light. The more colours you can control, the more power you have, but also the more power you use, the quicker you'll die, which I think is a really cool concept. Like, you can use as much power as you want, but then it's going to have a big effect on you in the end. Like, you might have enough power to win a fight, but in the end you'll use your powers too much and you'll end up dying anyway. So I think that does sound really cool. It's quite different to anything I've read before, and I love magic systems. I love like interesting different magic systems. The Mistborn trilogy, I like the whole concept of metal giving powers, and in this one it's the light and the colours giving powers, which is it just sounds so much fun. So I do find this book quite intimidating because of the size of the books and the length of the series, but I think because the series is now complete, that will help me to feel a little less intimidated, and maybe I'll actually get to these books in the next couple of years. I don't think it's a series I could read too quickly, but I'm hoping that maybe if I could read one book from the series I could read it every other month and complete it in a year, or I could read like one book a year for the next 6 years. All I'm saying is I think it's going to take me a while to get through the series, and I need to stop putting it off, otherwise it will take even longer. And then the final book on my list is The School for Good and Evil by Simone Chanini. This is a series about two girls called Agatha and Sophie who go to this school for people who are going to become parts of fairy tales. So they have one side of the school which is for people who are good and going to become like princesses, princes, heroes, heroines, that kind of thing, and one side which is going to be for like the evil characters, like the villains, the supporting villains, or the sidekicks. Everyone has a sidekick. And there are two characters who, if you can see, one's like thinks she's going to be a princess and one's like dresses dark, and they have sort of like a physical stereotype about them, and everyone assumes that the blonde cute one is going to be a princess and the one who dresses all in black and lives in a graveyard is going to be a witch. But you quickly find out at the beginning of this series that it's not that way. It sort of questions a lot of stereotype. It sounds a lot of fun. I have tried reading this book a couple of times before. Both times I only got about 100 or so pages in, although I did try reading this quite recently, so I might see if I can continue from where I left off last time. I'm not sure why I keep putting this book down. It might be because it's a middle grade and it's a little bit too easy for me, but I do want to give this another go and try to get through this book. I'm not sure how many books there are in the series, but because it's a middle grade, I think it should be quite easy to get through. So at this point in the story, they're just sort of beginning the lessons, and I think once I get into that, it might help me to be more interested in the story, like seeing them learning how to be their respective fairy tale characters. I really like the idea of a school for becoming a character in a fairy tale. That just sounds like really interesting, and I think it could be a lot of fun. I'm not sure how many books there are in the series. It might be a trilogy, but I also think there's a spin-off series about it as well. So there is quite a lot of content to read about these characters if I do enjoy reading the book. So I am quite keen to get back to this book again and just really try and get through it. I love the school setting. I love that they're in a boarding school and away from parents, because I think that is always quite fun. There's lots of different magical creatures to learn about, and there's so many different characters, and the other students are like, yeah, they're different fairy tale species and things, so that adds an extra dimension to the sort of character type. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but I just need to like actually read it, which seems to be my problem with most books. I want to read them, I'm really excited to read them, I don't read them. Why? Who knows? So that's my list of series that I want to start. If you've read any of these series, leave me a comment down below telling me what you thought of them and which ones you think I should read first. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back with another video next week. Bye!